Good day. Today is Wednesday, May 13th. My name is Reverend Jim Keenan, and you've come to the daily reflection time from our church, the corner of Sherburne and Carlton, St. Luke's United Church. We're taking this Easter tide, the 50 days of Easter, to focus on what tools do we have? What ways do we follow? How do we actualize the great gift we've been given of experiencing the risen Lord and going out and sharing as we go along His way, His truth, His life, His light to transform the face of the earth in our own day, in our own little or big way. I've been discussing each day different what we've learned about what tools we have, how to use those tools. Yesterday, I began a short series I'm doing on the one thing you can't do with the Bible, you can't do with the stories of Jesus, is to use them to exclude others. Jesus' message of salvation was an inclusive one, that each and every human being is made in the image of God and has their God-given duty to help other human beings and to realize that each one of them is a beloved, including themselves, and to actualize that belovedness in their life. Yesterday, I looked at one passage that is often used to exclude Paul's letter to the Romans, the first chapter of Romans, where there's condemnation of behavior of sexuality between men and women, men and men, and women, and all sorts of discussion of depravity. The problem when people use that to point their finger and exclude gay people who, by the way they're born, their ontology, if you have it will, love people of their same sex, to exclude them. And actually the church has given not the blueprint so much, but the background and the basic rationale for most of the persecution in the Western world of homosexuals, either tacitly or sometimes explicitly. And sometimes it's been through the use of our sacred scriptures. With Romans 1, it was very clear, Paul wasn't talking about homosexuality as a disposition, being an anathema, but rather he was talking about the fact that no human being can excuse bad behavior, that there's a certain inner law in each one of our, moral law, natural law inside each one of our hearts that dictates that we choose what is right and what is wrong, or cover ourselves in darkness from what is right, and so on. And so he discusses this in the context of those with or without the law, or those with or without salvation in Jesus Christ, and says we're all can be guilty. And because people turn away from that inner moral law that each human being has in their hearts, they end up acting in depraved ways. But when he's talking about men having sex with men and so on, he's talking about pedestry, where boys and men and all sorts of degenerate behavior that was going on in his world. He wasn't talking about two human beings of the same sex that are in love with each other and express that love through their sexuality. Now, the passage I'm looking at today, this is part 2 of You Can't Exclude People by Using the Bible, is chapter 19 of Genesis. We know this past, and we know about it. It's the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Particularly, we're focusing in on the way a couple of visitors were treated and what the people in that city, all the men, were involved and culpable, how they treated the stranger. I say that because this passage has been used for generations to condemn, in God's eye, those who are homosexual, when it really has nothing to do with homosexuality at all. I'm just reading selected verses from chapter 19, but you can read the whole chapter, and I believe you will come to the same conclusion that I, as well as innumerable, the majority of biblical scholars, even right back to St. Jerome over 1,000 years ago, one of the first great Catholic historians and biblical scholars. So it starts here. The two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. He said, "Please, my lords, turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you can rise early and go on your way." They said, "No, we will spend the night in the square." But he urged them strongly. So they turned aside to him and entered his house, and he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man, surrounded the house, and they called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so we may know them." Lot went out the door to the men, shut the door after him, and said, "I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Look, I have two daughters who have not known a man. Let me bring them out to you and do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof." But they replied, "Stand back." And they pressed hard against Lot and came near the door to break it down. But the men inside reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck with blindness the men who were at the door of the house, both small and great, so they were unable to find the door. Now, the reason that has nothing to do with the condemnation, the bringing of God's flash of light of blindness upon these people. It's nothing to do with homosexuality. It's all to do with not showing hospitality to the stranger, which was a deep held trait in the Middle East, a behavior, the accepted behavior. You notice Lot does exactly that when the men come. And actually, when you delve into the history of this city, they were what they called hill cities. They were built on hills, and they had fortifications, and they had done fairly well. They were quite wealthy. They had lots of food and other stuff, but they did not share with anyone, even to the extent they were very greedy and selfish, and turned in on themselves and carried on and debauched and something because they had all this excess that should have been shared with others. So when these strangers came, they were not even willing to show a couple of strangers a little bit of decency. In fact, they decided to use an age-old practice. When you have people, your foe, this was done even as recently, it's been done throughout history, but even as recently as the civil wars that raged in Zaire over the last 20 years or so, they would rape their enemies, their foes, those who they considered enemies, to humiliate them. Nothing to do with sexuality, just a tool of war, a tool of humiliation. It's not saying that the people of Sodom were homosexuals or in homosexual relationships. It's just saying they were evil men who would not share the goodness they had been blessed with. Plain and simple. I invite you to read the entire story of the judgment of Sodom. There's a lot more there. It's telling us a lot about Abraham and his hegemony in terms of the development of the early Israeli Jewish people, Hebrew people, and tells us a number of other things too. Of course, how they treated women. I mean, Lot, even to uphold hospitality, because these people had entered into his house. Talk about a shame and honor system. He was willing to sacrifice his daughters rather than have strangers he had welcomed in harmed in any way. So there's a lot there to read, but it's very clear. If you're going to exclude gay people from your fellowship, you can't use the story of Sodom and Gomorrah for it. Reflect on this and pray about it. And I'll be back tomorrow with part 3 of this mini-series. You can't use the Bible to exclude people. God bless. I'll see you tomorrow.